19th Oct the day. In history with shocking events and inventions. October 19th, a single day that repeated itself through wars, science, and daring invention. It's the day a siege ended a revolution, a stock crash rattled the world, and pioneers challenged the skies and tracks. From Yorktown's surrender to the first flight circling the Eiffel Tower, this date holds stories of power, risk, and revelation. In just a few minutes, you'll follow 12 unforgettable moments etched by time. Moments that reshaped nations, saved lives, broke records, and stirred imaginations. This is October 19th, turning points that echo forever. Let's begin. Number 1. Yorktown's Echo. Surrender that changed a nation, 1781. On the morning of October 19, 1781, the fields around Yorktown, Virginia were quiet but charged. Dew lay on the grass. Cannon stood silent. For years, the American Revolution had raged, implacable, uncertain, thrusting colonies into rebellion, testing alliances, and rewriting what a nation could be. On that day, Britain's General Charles Cornwallis marched his troops out in formation, his white flag raised, and formally surrendered to George Washington and his French allies. That moment wasn't just the end of a siege, it was the turning point that would birth a new country. For 8 grueling years, colonists had fought. They had marched through swamps, endured winters in makeshift encampments, and risked everything to claim no taxation without representation. Britain had sent fleets, redcoats, mercenaries. The war stretched across colonies and seas. The world watched. Some believed the British would crush the uprising. Others held hope for liberty's rise. At Yorktown's siege, American and French forces encircled Cornwallis's army, cutting off supply and escape. Day by day, British morale weakened. The French fleet blocked naval relief. The Allies bombarded British defenses. Shells tore earth and morale. Inside those red brick walls, British troops were trapped, their options exhausted. On that fateful October 19th, Washington received Cornwallis's formal surrender. Thousands of British and Hessian soldiers laid down arms before the Allied lines. The flag of Great Britain was lowered. Flags of the new American states rose. The sound echoing across the field symbolized more than defeat. It signaled the end of imperial dominance in North America. The surrender at Yorktown didn't immediately end war. Skirmishes continued, treaties were negotiated, and politics swirled. But few moments in history are so laden with symbolism. Historians often say, after Yorktown, the revolution had won. The British government, facing war weariness and financial drain, began negotiating peace. The 1783 Treaty of Paris followed. Contrast this. Before Yorktown, colonial America was fragmented, under-resourced, doubted by powers abroad. Afterward, the new nation stood recognized by foreign governments, with ideals of democracy and rights guiding its future. That contrast, from rebel outpost to sovereign nation, gives this day its resonance. In the years that followed, the fledgling United States labored with contradictions, the issue of slavery, how to govern, how to extend liberty without division. But Yorktown stayed in the national memory, as proof that courage, alliance, and resolve could topple empires. Number 2. Streptomycin, the day science fought back, 1943. It's 1943, a world gripped by war, rationing, and fear. But deep in the basement of Rutgers University in New Jersey, something extraordinary is happening, not with bullets or tanks, but with soil, microscopes, and an unshakable belief that nature itself holds the cure to humanity's oldest killers. Meet Albert Schatz, a determined young graduate student. He's not a war hero, not a politician, just a quiet scientist with calloused hands and sleepless eyes. The war rages thousands of miles away, yet in this cramped laboratory, Schatz is fighting a different kind of enemy, one that cannot be seen or heard, but has taken more lives than all the wars combined. Tuberculosis. Under the mentorship of Dr. Selman Waksman, a renowned microbiologist, Schatz spends endless hours culturing soil bacteria. The mission? To find something, anything, that could destroy disease-causing microbes. The irony is stunning. They're digging through dirt to save humanity. Now imagine the scene. A cloudy petri dish lies under the glass of a microscope. Schatz adjusts the lens and freezes. He sees a faint, clean halo forming around a bacterial colony, a small circle of death for tuberculosis bacteria. He repeats the test again. Same result. Again. Still the same. That halo wasn't just bacteria dying. It was history being written. He names the substance streptomycin, after the Streptomyces graeseus organism that produced it. At first, it is just another experiment to him, a data point in a long line of failed trials. But when medical researchers test it on animals and humans, something miraculous happens. Patients who were dying, gasping their last breaths in overcrowded TB wards, begin to recover. Archival sounds of coughing fade to laughter, nurses whispering, "He's breathing better." Doctors shaking their heads in disbelief. For the first time, tuberculosis, the white plague that haunted poets, workers, and kings alike, had met its match. Before streptomycin, TB wasn't just a disease, it was a death sentence. Entire families were torn apart. Sanatoriums filled the hillsides of Europe and America. People were isolated, shamed, and left to die slowly in silence. But after 1943, hope had a name, and it came from dirt. Newspapers called it a miracle from the soil. The public was euphoric. Waxman's name dominated headlines, awards poured in, and pharmaceutical companies scrambled to mass-produce the drug. But amid the celebration, one name quietly faded from the spotlight: Albert Schatz. The young scientist who made the actual discovery was pushed aside. Credit went to Waxman, his mentor, who claimed ownership of the project and the fame that followed. Schatz, feeling betrayed, took Rutgers University and Waxman to court, a bold move for a student against a global scientific giant. He won partial recognition and royalties, but the Nobel Prize that came later went solely to Waxman. The world crowned one hero and forgot the other. And that's the thing about history, isn't it? We often remember the names in the headlines, not the hands in the shadows. Pause for narration contrast. While the world fought its deadliest war, these two men waged their own, not for land or power, but for truth and legacy. Even today, historians debate who truly discovered streptomycin: Waxman, the visionary, or Schatz, the relentless experimenter who refused to give up. Here's a question for you. If the world owed you its health, but no one gave you the credit, would you stay silent? Let that sink in. But beyond their personal conflict lies something greater, a turning point for humankind. Streptomycin became the first effective drug against tuberculosis. It didn't just treat symptoms, it destroyed the bacteria itself. That breakthrough ignited the antibiotic revolution. Penicillin had come before, yes, but streptomycin was the one that took medicine beyond skin infections and opened the door to curing systemic, deadly diseases. Soon after, other antibiotics followed: chloramphenicol, tetracyclines, erythromycin, all direct descendants of this one soil-borne miracle. Think about that. One student, one petri dish, one soil sample, and millions of lives changed forever. Hospitals that once echoed with coughing began to sound different, quieter, hopeful. The face of death slowly turned into the face of survival. Nations ravaged by disease saw their youth restored. The global life expectancy curve bent upward for the first time in history. And yet, this victory had a dark side. The miracle cure that once saved millions soon became overused, misused, and exploited. By the late 20th century, bacteria began evolving, mutating, learning how to resist the very drugs created to kill them. The age of antibiotics gave birth to the age of resistance. And that's nature's ultimate revenge. For every answer, it writes a new question. Still, streptomycin's legacy remains immortal. Even today, scientists studying antibiotic resistance trace their roots back to Schatz's humble experiment. Modern TB drugs still owe their molecular foundations to that 1943 discovery. So the next time you swallow an antibiotic, pause for a second and ask yourself, how often do we thank the soil beneath our feet? Because that's where this story began. Not in royal halls or corporate labs, but in a patch of dirt behind a chicken yard. Soft cinematic score swells. In the end, the discovery of streptomycin isn't just a tale of science. It is a human story. It's about persistence, rivalry, and redemption. It's about the invisible wars fought in silence while the world rages on. In 1943, the planet was tearing itself apart with bombs. Yet, in a quiet lab, humanity learned how to put itself back together. Maybe that's the real message, that even in chaos, discovery can bloom. That in dirt, we can still find hope. So, what do you think? Does true credit matter more than the cure itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what side of history you stand on. Because next, we're leaving the calm of the laboratory for the madness of the trading floor. It's October 19, 1987, Black Monday. When the world's richest nations watched their wealth evaporate in a single day, and no one saw it coming. Number 3, Black Monday, the day the market stood still, 1987. The calm before the storm. Imagine a crisp Monday morning, October 19, 1987. The hum of Wall Street fills the air. Traders grab coffee, check tickers, and prepare for what they believe will be another ordinary day. The stock market had been unstoppable, soaring through the mid-80s with record gains. People were calling it the era of endless growth. But just beneath that confidence, tension brewed, an invisible pressure building with each tick of the Dow. By the end of that day, history would record it as Black Monday, a collapse so severe it wiped out nearly a quarter of the market's value in a single trading session. It wasn't just numbers falling, it was trust, belief, and certainty unraveling all at once. The world before the fall. The mid-1980s were drenched in optimism. Personal computers were starting to invade offices, yuppies filled trading floors, and financial television networks celebrated the new wave of prosperity. Investors believed technology and deregulation had made markets smarter, faster, and somehow safer. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had climbed more than 40% in the first 8 months of 1987. We were in a new financial age, some said. Fortune seemed limitless, but beneath the gloss lay fragility. Rising interest rates, overvalued stocks, and new computer-based trading systems created a volatile mix, one nobody fully understood yet. It was the perfect setup for disaster. The morning bell. The first signs of panic. The bell rang at 9:30 a.m. in New York, and from the first moments, something felt wrong. Stocks opened lower, then plummeted further. A ripple became a wave. Brokers shouted orders, but the computers couldn't keep up. By mid-morning, ticker tapes were hours behind reality. Phones buzzed endlessly. What's happening? Traders asked each other. Over in London and Hong Kong, markets had already crashed overnight. When New York opened, the panic simply migrated across the globe. By 10:30 a.m., investors realized this wasn't a correction. It was a collapse. The role of portfolio insurance. A new technology was supposed to protect investors. Portfolio insurance. It was a computer-driven strategy that automatically sold futures when stock prices dropped, aiming to limit losses. But as stocks fell and computers triggered more sales, it created a self-reinforcing spiral. Each drop fueled the next. One trader recalled, it was like watching an avalanche start in slow motion, and then there was no stopping it. By noon, screens across Wall Street were bleeding red. Global markets collapse news spread fast. Around the world, panic became contagious. In London, the FTSE had already fallen by more than 10%. In Hong Kong, trading had been halted altogether. Financial journalists scrambled to find words that fit the scale of the chaos. The phrase Black Monday appeared in headlines by midday. Back in New York, even the most seasoned investors were stunned. One executive at Merrill Lynch said, "It felt like the system itself was breaking down." Voices from the floor. Amid the chaos, the human side of the crash unfolded. Secretaries wept as their retirement funds evaporated. Small investors called brokers begging for answers. Phones never stopped ringing. Traders on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange stood shoulder to shoulder, shouting, sweating, and staring in disbelief at the numbers flashing on the big board. That afternoon, a veteran trader reportedly whispered, "I've been here 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this." When the closing bell rang, the Dow had fallen 508 points, a drop of 22.6% in a single day. Adjusted for today's scale, that would be equivalent to several thousand points vanishing before dinner. Picking up the pieces. When morning came on October 20th, the world was still reeling. TV anchors spoke in somber tones. Newspapers printed black borders around their financial pages. Economists scrambled to understand how the safest market in the world had imploded overnight. Yet remarkably, the financial system didn't collapse entirely. The Federal Reserve, under Chairman Alan Greenspan, issued a rare emergency statement. The Federal Reserve System, consistent with its responsibilities as the nation's central bank, affirms its readiness to serve as a source of liquidity to support the economic and financial system. That one sentence steadied nerves across the world. Liquidity began to flow. Slowly, confidence returned. Within 2 days, the market had regained about half of its losses. The legacy of Black Monday. In the years that followed, regulators overhauled the trading system. They introduced circuit breakers, mechanisms that automatically halt trading when prices fall too fast, allowing panic to cool. Black Monday also forced economists to rethink how psychology and computer algorithms interact. It wasn't just data that moved markets, it was fear. Some say the event changed modern finance forever. It marked the beginning of the digital age of trading, where algorithms became key players on Wall Street. And though markets have since seen crashes, the dot-com bust, the 2008 financial crisis, none have matched the speed and shock of that Monday in 1987. It was a day when time seemed to stop. The day the screens went red. For those who lived through it, the memory is still vivid. The eerie silence after the closing bell, the looks exchanged between traders, the disbelief hanging in the air. In documentaries and financial textbooks, Black Monday stands as both a warning and a mystery. How quickly faith in a system can crumble, and how resilient it can be afterward. As one journalist later wrote, "It wasn't just the fall of numbers, it was the fall of certainty, and somehow that made everyone a little more human." Black Monday was more than a market crash, it was a reckoning. It exposed the fragility of technology, the limits of human control, and the raw emotion that underpins every dollar traded. From that chaos rose a new understanding of global finance. The system bent, but did not break. And perhaps that's why the story of October 19th, 1987 still captivates us. It reminds us that behind every market surge or fall, there's a heartbeat, a mix of fear, hope, and faith in tomorrow. Because in the end, money may be numbers on a screen. But history? History is made by the people watching those numbers fall and daring to rebuild again. Number 4. Max Planck and the Birth of Quantum Theory, 1900. A Flicker in the Darkness, Berlin, December 14th, 1900. Snow drifts softly through the streets. Inside a lecture hall at the Prussian Academy of Sciences, a small crowd gathers. Scientists, mathematicians, curious minds. The gas lamps glow dimly, reflecting on blackboards covered in chalk equations. At the front stands Max Planck, a quiet, precise man with a furrowed brow and the demeanor of someone more comfortable with calculation than applause. He isn't here to unveil a revolution. He has simply come to solve a nagging problem in physics, one that has been haunting scientists for decades. Yet by the time he finishes his talk, the world of physics will never be the same again. What he is about to announce, the law of blackbody radiation, will unknowingly light the fuse for the most groundbreaking idea in science since Newton, quantum theory. The mystery of the black body. To understand Planck's moment, we must first step back into the puzzle that baffled an entire generation of physicists: black body radiation. A black body isn't something dark or mysterious. It's a perfect absorber and emitter of energy. Imagine heating a metal furnace until it glows, from dull red to bright orange to searing white. Scientists could observe this glow and measure the energy at different wavelengths of light. They wanted to predict the spectrum, how much energy a black body emits at each color or wavelength. But every theory failed. Classical physics, built on Newton-IS laws and Maxwell's electromagnetism, predicted something absurd: that as wavelengths got shorter, the energy emitted would rise infinitely. This nightmare became known as the ultraviolet catastrophe. In simpler terms, according to classical physics, everything around us should constantly emit infinite energy and glow with deadly ultraviolet light. Clearly, something was wrong. Planck's dilemma. A reluctant revolutionary, Planck wasn't a rebel or a dreamer. He was a deeply traditional physicist, believing that the universe ran on unbreakable, elegant rules. He even once said, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents, but because its opponents eventually die." Ironically, he was about to become the man who would usher in such a truth himself. For years, Planck tried to fit blackbody radiation into classical physics. He twisted formulas, adjusted constants, tested theories, but nothing worked. Then one evening, out of frustration rather than inspiration, he tried something unthinkable. He assumed that energy wasn't continuous. Instead, it came in discrete packets, tiny bundles he called quanta. It was a desperate mathematical trick, but it worked. The equation that changed everything. The formula he presented that December evening was deceptively simple. N, where E is the energy of a quantum, and nu is the frequency of radiation, and H is a new constant, a number that would soon bear his name, Planck's constant. This tiny number, 6.626 x 10^34 joule seconds, described the smallest possible unit of energy in nature. Planck didn't yet grasp the full meaning of his own discovery. He later wrote, "It was an act of desperation. I was ready to sacrifice any of my previous convictions about physics." But what he had done was revolutionary. He had quantized energy, shattering the centuries-old belief that energy flowed smoothly and continuously. In a single stroke, the ultraviolet catastrophe vanished, and a new era began. The ripples of a revolution. At first, nobody understood the implications. Planck himself treated it as a mathematical convenience. He thought the quantization was just a trick to make the numbers work. But over the next few years, other scientists began to notice something strange. Planck's idea explained everything that classical physics could not. In 1905, Albert Einstein used Planck's theory to explain the photoelectric effect, showing that light itself behaved like particles, later called photons. In 1913, Niels Bohr applied it to his model of the atom, explaining why electrons orbit at specific levels rather than collapsing into the nucleus. By the 1920s, Planck's modest equation had transformed into a full-blown revolution, quantum mechanics, the science of the very small. And it all started with a quiet man trying to fix a problem with glowing furnaces. A man torn between two worlds. As the scientific world embraced quantum theory, Planck felt torn. He admired Einstein's brilliance, but was uneasy with the bizarre implications of this new physics. Probabilities, uncertainty, and randomness at the heart of reality. He once admitted, "I did not think of energy quanta as physical reality. My act was purely formal." Yet, whether he liked it or not, his discovery had opened a door that could never be closed. What began as a patch to fix one problem had rewritten the laws of nature. The legacy of H, a constant in chaos. Today, Planck's constant is one of the cornerstones of modern science. It defines the scale at which quantum effects appear, the bridge between the classical world we see and the invisible quantum realm that governs it. It's embedded in everything. In the lasers that scan barcodes and perform eye surgery, in the transistors that power every computer chip, in the GPS satellites that guide planes and cars. Even our definition of the kilogram, one of the base units of measurement, now depends on Planck's constant. Every time you use a smartphone, stream a movie, or switch on a LED light, you're seeing Planck's discovery at work, the human story behind the numbers. Max Planck lived through 2 world wars, personal loss and political turmoil. His home was destroyed in World War II. His son was executed for plotting against Hitler. Through it all, he remained devoted to science, saying, "Science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, and that is because, in the last analysis, we ourselves are part of nature, and therefore part of the mystery we are trying to solve." Planck died in 1947 at age 89. long before quantum mechanics would give birth to semiconductors, nuclear energy, and quantum computing. Yet his legacy remains immortal. The smallest scale of existence, the Planck length, bears his name. It's the theoretical limit beyond which the very fabric of space and time begins to blur. From the smallest particles to the vastness of the cosmos, his fingerprint lies everywhere. A universe made of quanta. Looking back, Planck's moment in 1900 feels like a whisper before a storm. The soft click of a lock opening to a new dimension of understanding. In that cold Berlin lecture hall, he didn't just solve a physics problem, he rewrote reality. Because of him, we now know that light can be both wave and particle, that certainty dissolves into probability, and that the universe at its heart is not smooth and continuous, but granular, pixelated, quantized. It's poetic to think, in trying to explain how a furnace glows, Planck illuminated the entire universe. Every great leap in human knowledge begins with a question, and sometimes an act of desperation. Planck's question was simple. Why does a heated object glow the way it does? The answer, however, opened the door to modern physics. So the next time you look at a glowing bulb or the screen in your hand, remember that the light you see follows a rule written in chalk by a humble German physicist in 1900, a rule that began with a whisper in a lecture hall and became the foundation of everything we now call quantum reality. Number 5. The first summit of Cho Oyu, 1954, conquering the turquoise goddess. The silent giant of the Himalayas. High in the thin blue skies where the air burns cold and silence reigns supreme, there stands a mountain so breathtaking it almost seems unreal. But for much of human history, Cho Oyu remained untouched, a forbidden cathedral of ice and stone where only wind and snow dared to wander. That changed on October 19, 1954, when two Austrian climbers, Herbert Tichy and Sepp Jochler, alongside their courageous Nepalese Sherpa, Pasangdawa Lama, stood atop its glittering summit. They didn't just conquer a mountain, they conquered the limits of human endurance. This is the story of how determination, friendship, and quiet courage carried them to the roof of the world. The era of Everest fever. The 1950s were a golden age of mountaineering, an era when humanity's eyes turned skyward toward the world's highest peaks. In 1953, Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay had made history by summiting Mount Everest, the tallest of them all. The world was captivated. Newspapers hailed it as a triumph of will, science, and teamwork. But among climbers, the success sparked something deeper, a hunger to go further, higher, bolder. There were 14 peaks over 8,000 meters, and after Everest, the race to conquer the others began. Cho Oyu, though slightly shorter, was known for its deceptive calm. Climbers often called it the friendly giant, less steep than K2 or Annapurna, but with dangers all its own. Massive crevasses, unpredictable avalanches, and air so thin it felt like breathing through a straw. No one had yet reached its summit. The Austrian dream. In early 1954, Herbert Tichy, an Austrian geologist, writer, and mountaineer, began preparing an expedition. He wasn't a professional climber backed by government funds or national fame. He was, at heart, an explorer, a man driven by curiosity and the quiet call of adventure. His goal was clear: to reach the top of Cho Oyu, not with the fanfare of military-style expeditions, but with a small, determined team. Joining him was Sepp Jochler, an experienced Austrian climber known for his calm under pressure, and Pasangdawa Lama, a Sherpa who had already proven his heroism on previous Himalayan climbs. Unlike massive Everest teams with dozens of porters and tons of equipment, the Cho Oyu expedition was minimalist, light, agile, and deeply personal. Tichy once wrote, "It was not about glory, it was about friendship, discovery, and that quiet joy found in the mountains." Into the thin air. The journey began from Namche Bazaar, the gateway to the high Himalayas. From there, they trekked across frozen valleys, glacial rivers, and ridges where the world seemed to disappear into clouds. Every step took them higher into a realm where oxygen thinned and the human body began to protest. Their faces burned from sun and wind, their fingers numbed beneath layers of wool and leather. At night, the temperature dropped below 30 degrees Celsius. The only sounds were the moan of the wind and the deep, cracking sighs of glaciers shifting under the moonlight. Cho Oyu towered ahead, a silver pyramid glowing under the stars. They established a series of camps, climbing a little higher each day, carrying their supplies themselves. There were no helicopters, no modern oxygen systems, and no radios. Just rope, crampons, and courage. At 7,500 meters, storms trapped them for days. The air was so thin that sleep came in gasps. But Tichy and his team pressed on. October 19, 1954. The morning of October 19th dawned clear, the kind of rare crystalline day climbers dream of. The sky was an infinite blue, and the horizon shimmered with the shadows of Everest, Lhotse, and Makalu in the distance. With numb hands and frost-bitten faces, Tichy, Yorktown, and Pasang Dawa Lama began their final ascent from their high camp. They climbed without supplemental oxygen, a bold, almost reckless decision for that altitude. Each step was agony. The cold bit into their bones and every breath felt like inhaling knives. The snow was deep, the slope endless, yet they moved with quiet rhythm. Three figures bound by trust and a shared dream. After hours of grueling ascent, they reached the summit ridge. The wind howled like a living thing. And then, suddenly, there was no higher point left to climb. They had made it. At 8,188 meters above sea level, the first humans stood atop Cho Oyu. A view beyond words. Tichy later described the moment with poetic simplicity. The world fell away beneath us. There was no sound but the wind. The sky curved dark and endless above. We had reached the place where earth and heaven meet. They unfurled the Austrian flag, shared chocolate, and took photographs that would soon circle the world. Pasang Dawa Lama smiled quietly. His third attempt on the mountain had finally succeeded. Unlike other expeditions, there was no radio broadcast, no triumphant fanfare, just three men standing in silent awe at the edge of the world. And in that silence, something timeless passed between them. Not pride, but peace. A race against death. Getting to the top was only half the story. The descent was far more dangerous. As the light faded and exhaustion set in, the mountain began to remind them who was in charge. A sudden snowstorm rolled in. The trio was battered by freezing winds, their route vanishing beneath new drifts. Frostbite set in. Tichy's feet began to fail him. Pasang Dawa Lama, showing incredible strength, helped guide him down, refusing to leave his side. Their descent took nearly 2 days through blizzards and ice falls. By the time they reached base camp, frostbite had claimed parts of Tichy's toes, but their spirits were unbroken. They had survived Cho Oyu's wrath and earned her respect. The legacy of the turquoise goddess. When news of their success reached Europe, it was celebrated as one of the purest acts of mountaineering ever achieved. Unlike the heavily financed conquests of other peaks, this was a simple human triumph, a testament to endurance, friendship, and humility before nature. Cho Oyu became known as one of the most accessible 8,000-meter peaks in later decades. Hundreds would climb it in years to come. But no one would ever experience what Tichy, Yorktown, and Pasang Dawa Lama did on that cold October morning. The first glimpse from a summit no human eyes had ever seen. Their success inspired a new philosophy in mountaineering: light, clean, and human. It wasn't about domination, it was about coexistence. Today, Cho Oyu remains a training ground for Everest hopefuls, but its beauty, serenity, and spiritual aura make it unique. Locals still believe the goddess of Cho Oyu watches over travelers, her turquoise glow a sign of balance between courage and respect. Every mountain tells a story, but some speak softly, in whispers of wind and snow. On October 19, 1954, 3 men listened. They didn't conquer Cho Oyu, they met her, halfway between ambition and surrender. As you look at those shimmering Himalayan peaks today, remember, each summit reached began, not with muscle, but with a moment of belief. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't shouted from mountaintops. They're felt, in the stillness of the sky above 8,000 meters. Number 6. The Southern Campaign. Battle of Cedar Creek, 1864. The year was 1864, and America was a nation divided, not just by battle lines, but by ideals. The war had dragged on for 3 relentless years. Farms had turned into graveyards, families had been torn apart, and hope was fading fast. Yet, amid the smoke and despair, the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia became the stage for one of the Civil War U.S. most dramatic reversals, the Battle of Cedar Creek. The calm before the tempest. The Shenandoah Valley wasn't just another patch of contested land. It was the lifeline of the Confederacy, a rich farming region that fed Southern troops and supplied their armies with vital resources. Both sides understood that whoever controlled this valley could tilt the war's balance. By autumn, Union forces under Major General Philip Sheridan held the upper hand. His troops had already pushed the Confederate Army, led by Lieutenant General Jubal Early, deep into the valley. But Early, proud and cunning, wasn't done yet. He wanted to strike one last devastating blow, to prove that the South still had fight left in her. As the cool October air rolled through the valley, Early devised a daring plan. His men would march overnight through rough terrain, using the cover of darkness and thick morning fog to launch a surprise attack at dawn. The surprise at dawn. On October 19, 1864, just before sunrise, the valley lay wrapped in heavy mist. The Union camps were still quiet. Soldiers slept soundly, their rifles stacked, unaware that Confederate troops were moving swiftly through the woods. Then came the first shots, muffled at first, then thunderous. Confederate soldiers stormed into Union tents, bayonets flashing. Panic erupted. Half-dressed men scrambled for their weapons. Horses bolted. Cannon crews were caught off guard. For the next few hours, chaos ruled. Union lines buckled under the sudden onslaught. Early's men captured artillery, wagons, and supplies in a sweeping advance. From every ridge, it looked as if the Confederates had pulled off the impossible. By mid-morning, the once confident Union Army was in full retreat. Thousands fled northward, believing the battle lost before it had truly begun. Sheridan's ride, the turning point. But far away, in Winchester, some 20 miles from the battlefield, General Philip Sheridan heard the distant thunder of guns. Without hesitation, he mounted his horse, Rienzi, and galloped toward the sound of battle. That ride, later immortalized in poetry and paintings, would become one of the most legendary moments in American military history. Witnesses along the road saw Sheridan racing like a man possessed, dust flying behind him, his uniform streaked with mud. As he passed retreating soldiers, he shouted words that ignited hope. "Turn back, boys. Face the other way. We'll win this yet." His voice carried the weight of defiance, his presence the promise of redemption. When Sheridan finally reached the battlefield, the sight that met him was devastating. Smoke hanging low, men disorganized, morale broken. Yet his arrival was like a spark in dry grass. The spirit of the Union Army caught fire once more. The counterattack. With relentless energy, Sheridan rallied his troops. He reorganized regiments, positioned artillery, and rode along the lines shouting encouragement. "We'll make coffee from Cedar Creek before the sun goes down," he vowed. As the sun began to sink, Sheridan launched a massive counterattack. Union artillery roared back to life. Infantry lines advanced in perfect rhythm. The men who had been routed that morning now surged forward with renewed fury. By dusk, the Confederate Army, which had seemed unstoppable just hours earlier, was collapsing. Soldiers dropped their weapons and fled through the valley they had fought so hard to claim. Victory in the valley. The Union victory at Cedar Creek was decisive. The Shenandoah Valley, long a symbol of Southern strength, was now firmly in Northern hands. The Confederacy had lost its final chance to regain momentum. But beyond the battlefield, the win carried a deeper significance. News of Sheridan's triumph reached Washington just weeks before the presidential election of 1864. The victory lifted Union morale and helped secure Abraham Lincoln's re-election, ensuring the war would continue until its just conclusion, the preservation of the Union and the end of slavery. The aftermath for the soldiers who survived. Cedar Creek was a haunting memory. The valley was littered with broken wagons, torn flags, and silent bodies, a grim reminder of war's cost. But for the nation, it was a story of resilience. Sheridan became a hero. His daring ride turned into legend. The poem, Sheridan's Ride, published shortly after the battle, captured the nation's imagination. Monuments would later rise in his honor, but none could surpass the spirit of that single day, when leadership and courage turned despair into triumph. Legacy of the battle. The Battle of Cedar Creek symbolized more than victory. It marked the beginning of the end. The Union's control of the Shenandoah Valley crippled Confederate logistics, cutting off vital supplies. Within 6 months, General Robert E. Lee would surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, and the Civil War would finally draw to a close. Even today, the rolling fields of Middletown, Virginia, carry echoes of that fateful morning. Visitors can still trace the path of Sheridan's Ride, where a single man's courage reshaped the outcome of an entire war. It's a story not just of military strategy, but of hope reclaimed from the jaws of defeat. A reminder that sometimes history turns on the willpower of one determined soul. Number 7. Italy takes Tripoli from the Ottoman Empire, 1912. The year was 1912, a world teetering between the age of empires and the birth of modern warfare. Across continents, nations were flexing their muscles, chasing colonies, and carving borders that would shape the next century. In the midst of it all, a Mediterranean power, Italy, set its eyes on a distant desert jewel. Tripoli, the ancient gateway to North Africa. The dream of a new Roman Empire. For decades, Italy had watched as France claimed Algeria, Britain took Egypt, and Germany expanded into Africa's heartlands. The Italians, unified as a kingdom only half a century earlier, felt like the last to the feast. National pride demanded something bold, something to prove Italy's place among the great powers. The call went out from politicians and press alike. Italia must have her empire. Tripoli, part of the crumbling Ottoman Empire, seemed the perfect target. Lying just across the Mediterranean from Sicily, it was strategically positioned and lightly defended. The Italian public saw it as a historic destiny, a return to the lands once ruled by ancient Rome. The road to war. In September 1911, Italy delivered an ultimatum to the Ottoman Empire: surrender control of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica, or face war. When the Ottomans hesitated, Italy acted swiftly. On September 29th, Italian warships bombarded Tripoli's harbor, marking the beginning of the Italo-Turkish War. What Italy expected to be a swift victory turned out to be anything but. Tripoli fell quickly to naval bombardment and a ground invasion, but the desert beyond was a different beast entirely. Ottoman soldiers, aided by local Arab tribes, fought back with fierce determination. The Italians found themselves trapped in unfamiliar terrain, battling heat, sandstorms, and guerrilla resistance that refused to die. The struggle for Tripoli. When Italian troops finally entered the city of Tripoli on October 5, 1911, they were greeted not by cheers, but by silence. The inhabitants watched warily from behind shuttered windows. To the Ottomans, Tripoli was sacred ground, one of the empire's oldest provinces. To Italy, it was the symbol of ambition fulfilled. But the occupation soon turned bloody. A revolt broke out days later, leading to the massacre of Tripoli, where Italian forces, fearing betrayal, executed hundreds of locals. News of the killings rippled across Europe, staining Italy's image and igniting outrage in the Muslim world. Despite the moral backlash, Italy pressed on. For months, the war dragged through deserts and oases, from Derna to Benghazi. The Italians used cutting-edge technology, airplanes, wireless communication, and motor vehicles, in ways never before seen in warfare. The birth of modern warfare. It was in this very conflict, over the skies of Libya, that history witnessed the first aerial bombings. On November 1, 1911, Italian pilot Giulio Gavotti tossed small grenades from his aircraft over enemy positions, a crude act, yet revolutionary. It marked the dawn of a terrifying new era. The sky, once a domain of peace, had become a weapon. Historians later called the Italo-Turkish War a rehearsal for World War I. The tactics tested here, machine guns on horseback, naval blockades, trench positions, would soon sweep across Europe on an unimaginable scale. The Ottoman struggle and the Arab spirit. Meanwhile, the Ottoman army, stretched thin across multiple fronts, couldn't afford to lose face. But they had neither the ships to challenge Italy's navy, nor the resources to sustain a prolonged defense. So they adapted, retreating inland, rallying Bedouin tribes to fight alongside them. Among the Ottoman officers were men who would later become giants in Middle Eastern history. One of them was Mustafa Kemal, a young officer whose leadership and courage in Libya earned him distinction. Years before he would go on to found the modern Republic of Turkey, the Ottoman resistance turned into a symbol of resilience. Even without direct support from Istanbul, they fought in small mobile bands, ambushing convoys, cutting supply lines, and vanishing into the sands. A war of wills. By mid-1912, the war had dragged on far longer than Italy had anticipated. At home, the public grew restless, casualties mounted, the economy groaned under the weight of overseas adventure. But then, fate intervened. In the Balkans, a new storm was brewing. The Balkan League, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro, was preparing to strike at the Ottoman Empire's European territories. Facing disaster on two fronts, the Ottoman government had no choice but to make peace with Italy. The Treaty of Lausanne, Auchi, on October 18, 1912, exactly 1 year after the fighting began, the Treaty of Lausanne, Auchi, was signed in Switzerland. The terms were clear. The Ottoman Empire would cede control of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica to Italy. Though the Ottomans retained a symbolic role as protectors of the region's Muslim population, the land was now officially under Italian administration. Tripoli, the bride of the Mediterranean, had changed hands. For Italy, it was a triumphant moment. Bells rang in Rome. Newspapers hailed King Victor Emmanuel III as a modern Caesar. The government declared that Italy had finally earned her place among the colonial powers. Yet beneath the celebrations, few realized how deeply the conquest would shape the future of North Africa and of Italy itself. Seeds of the future. In Tripoli, Italy began constructing a new colonial order. Roads, railways, and schools were built, but they served Italians more than Libyans. The local population was pushed to the margins, taxed heavily, and denied political voice. Resistance simmered for decades, eventually giving rise to the Libyan nationalist movement. In the 1920s and 30s, Omar Mukhtar, a Bedouin leader, would lead a fierce guerrilla campaign against Italian rule, a struggle that inspired freedom movements long after his execution. Meanwhile, Italy's victory in Libya emboldened its imperial ambitions. It planted the seeds for Benito Mussolini's fascist vision of a new Roman Empire, which would later drive Italy into devastating wars in Ethiopia and beyond. The conquest of Tripoli wasn't merely a colonial episode. It was the prelude to a century of turbulence, resistance, and revolution. The fall of an empire. For the Ottomans, the loss of Tripoli was more than territorial. It was psychological. It marked the beginning of the end for the empire's global influence. The war exposed its military weakness and accelerated the nationalist movements within its borders. Within 2 years, the empire would be plunged into World War I, and within a decade, it would vanish altogether. And yet, in that fading twilight of Ottoman power, something new was born. The rise of Turkish nationalism, the reshaping of the Middle East, and the redefinition of what empire itself meant. Looking back today, when you walk through Tripoli's narrow streets, echoes of 1912 still linger. Italian architecture mingles with Ottoman minarets. Marble facades whisper stories of conquest and rebellion. Every stone, every archway, tells a tale of ambition and loss. The clock tower, built by the Ottomans, still stands, its hands frozen in time, a silent witness to the day one empire fell and another rose. The capture of Tripoli may seem like a footnote in global history, but in truth it was a turning point, a collision between old-world imperialism and the dawn of modern warfare. It showed the world that technology, politics, and power were entering a new, ruthless age, and it all began with a single bombardment across the shimmering waters of the Mediterranean, an act that would change nations, redraw maps, and set the stage for the century that followed. Number 8. From Justice to War. The turning points of October 19, 1789-1914. History has a strange rhythm. On some days, humanity builds, legislates, and uplifts, and on others, it destroys, fights, and bleeds. October 19th is one such date. It has witnessed the birth of justice and the collapse of peace, the rise of human ideals and the brutal reality of war. From John Jay's oath as the first Chief Justice of the United States to the First Battle of Ypres, this day threads together the moral, judicial, and military crossroads of civilization itself. The birth of American justice. John Jay's oath, 1789. Let's begin in New York City, October 19, 1789. The newly independent United States was still finding its voice. The Constitution had only recently been ratified, and the nation's leaders were struggling to define what justice for all truly meant. Into this uncertain moment stepped a man of intellect, diplomacy, and deep moral conviction, John Jay. That day, Jay took the oath of office as the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. It was more than a ceremony, it was a statement. For the first time, the fledgling nation would have a judicial branch strong enough to interpret and defend its constitution. Jay's appointment marked the foundation of a system that would one day decide everything from freedom of speech to civil rights, from corporate power to presidential accountability. John Jay wasn't a showman, he was a man of quiet authority, a diplomat who helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris, ending the American Revolution, a thinker who believed that law must guide emotion, that order must temper liberty. In the candlelit courtroom that October morning, there were no cameras, no applause, only a few witnesses and the weight of history. Yet in that silence, the ideals of justice, balance, and interpretation took root. Who could have imagined then that this simple act of swearing an oath would ripple through centuries? Would John Jay ever have believed that 200 years later, the Supreme Court he founded would decide on rights he couldn't yet imagine? Racial equality, gender justice, digital privacy. Every time a gavel strikes in an American courtroom, it echoes back to October 19, 1789. The voice of conscience, Frederick Douglass and the unfinished struggle. While John Jay built the House of Justice, Frederick Douglass gave it a conscience. Though not tied to a single October 19th event, his influence threads through this timeline like a moral compass pointing north. By the late 1800s, Douglass had become a voice not just for Black Americans, but for all who believed freedom had no color. He was living proof that ideas can be stronger than chains. Imagine Douglass standing before a crowd, his deep voice carrying across the hall. Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, neither persons nor property will be safe. Those words still burn today. It is no coincidence that Douglass's philosophy of moral law and John Jay's foundation of legal order form two halves of the same truth. Law without humanity is tyranny, and humanity without law is chaos. And on this day in history, as one part of the world sought justice in courts, another part descended into chaos on the battlefield. The First Battle of Ypres, when the world shattered, 1914. Fast forward to October 19, 1914, 125 years after John Jay's oath. The setting has changed from polished courtrooms to muddy fields in Belgium. The world is now engulfed in the First World War. It's the dawn of the First Battle of Ypres, one of the most devastating clashes of the Great War, and one that would define the horrors of modern conflict. The Belgian town of Ypres was small and unassuming, surrounded by farmland and poplar trees. But on that October morning, it became the stage for the unthinkable. German and Allied forces collided in a desperate race to outflank each other in what became known as the Race to the Sea. The quiet countryside erupted with artillery fire, gas shells, and machine guns. Horses panicked, men screamed, and the earth itself seemed to convulse. For many of the young soldiers, This was their first taste of war, and their last. Boys barely out of school, clutching rifles heavier than their resolve, charged into walls of steel and smoke. One soldier later wrote in his diary, "We were told we'd be home by Christmas. Now we live from one shell burst to the next." By the time the battle ended in November, more than 200,000 men lay dead or wounded. Entire battalions were erased from the record. And yet, even in that horror, there were flickers of courage. Ordinary men performing extraordinary acts, carrying wounded comrades under fire, sharing rations with enemies in brief truces, or simply holding the line 1 hour longer than humanly possible. The clash of ideals, from law to chaos. What makes October 19th haunting is how it captures the contrast of civilization. In 1789, the world saw law elevated to its noblest form. In 1914, it saw humanity descend into its darkest. Between those dates, the story of human progress unfolds like a pendulum, swinging between reason and rage, creation and destruction. John Jay's courtroom and the trenches of Ypres could not have been more different, yet both shaped the world that came after. One defined justice, the other sacrifice. One preserved the rule of law, the other demanded that same law be rewritten for peace. The irony. Many of the soldiers dying in Belgium believed they were fighting for the very principles John Jay once helped enshrine: freedom, sovereignty, the rule of nations. But ideals have a way of being twisted in the crucible of war. And as the guns thundered over Flanders fields, a question hung in the air. Had humanity truly evolved, or had we merely learned to destroy on a grander scale? The unlikely threads that bind to this day, historians see October 19th as a day of moral contradiction, when law and war, justice and brutality, walked side by side. John Jay's signature represents the mind of civilization. Frederick Douglass's words represent its heart. The soldiers at Ypres represent its bleeding body. Together they form a tapestry of who we are, a species capable of unimaginable compassion and unspeakable cruelty, often on the very same day. Reflections across time. As you think about this date, consider how far we've come and how far we still have to go. Every constitution, every courtroom, every debate on justice owes something to John Jay's first step. Every voice that dares to speak truth to power walks in the echo of Frederick Douglass. And every peace treaty signed after a war bears the shadow of Ypres, a reminder of the cost of forgetting our humanity. So when you look at October 19th, don't see it as just a historical footnote. See it as a mirror, a day when humanity tried both justice and war, law and chaos, and discovered how fragile civilization truly is. From the oath of a judge to the cry of a soldier, from the courtroom to the trench, October 19th reminds us that progress and pain often share the same hourglass. One teaches us law, the other teaches us loss, and both are part of what it means to be human. Would you have stood with John Jay, building the first court of justice? Would you have marched with the soldiers at Ypres, believing the world could still be saved? Tell me below, whose courage moves you more? The one who created peace through law, or the one who sought peace through war? Number 9. The night Europe found its voice. The birth of the Eurovision Song Contest. A continent healing through sound. The year was 1955. Europe still bore the scars of 2 world wars. Cities rebuilt from rubble, families scattered across borders drawn and redrawn by conflict. Yet beneath the ruins, something powerful stirred. A yearning not for power or conquest, but for connection. On October 19th, in a quiet boardroom of the European Broadcasting Union, EBU, an idea took flight, one that would change the cultural map of the continent forever. The proposal was simple, yet audacious. Let there be a song contest, a competition of nations, not in arms, but in art. That day, the EBU officially approved the first Eurovision Song Contest, a stage where Europe could once again speak to itself, not through politics or propaganda, but through melody, rhythm, and shared emotion. No one in that room could have imagined that this modest initiative would become the longest-running international music event in the world. watched by hundreds of millions, uniting generations, and defining European identity through sound. The birth of an idea. The concept of Eurovision didn't appear out of thin air. It was the brainchild of Marcel Bezençon, a Swiss television executive and visionary. Inspired by Italy's Sanremo Music Festival, Bezençon believed that music could do what diplomacy often failed to achieve: bring nations together under one shared stage. But this was no easy dream. Europe in the 1950s was fractured by ideology, economics, and memory. The Cold War had split the continent in two. Television was still young, and most homes didn't even own a set. Yet Bezençon's idea resonated. In that October meeting, members of the EBU debated logistics: satellite transmission, time delays, multilingual broadcasts. But beneath the technical jargon, something poetic hung in the air. They weren't just planning a program, they were planning a bridge. Europe, long defined by its wars, would now find a new battlefield: the stage. The first stage of unity. Less than a year later, on May 24, 1956, the dream became real. The inaugural Eurovision Song Contest was held in Lugano, Switzerland. Only 7 countries participated, each submitting 2 songs. The event was modest: a small theater, limited broadcast reach, and black and white cameras capturing trembling singers under hot lights. Yet the symbolism was immense. For the first time since the devastation of World War II, European nations stood side by side, not in competition for territory, but for applause. When Lise Assia, representing Switzerland, performed Refrain, her voice carried more than melody. It carried memory, hope, and the sound of reconciliation. Her win wasn't just Switzerland's victory, it was Europe's quiet promise to itself: we will sing again. From broadcast to phenomenon. Through the decades that followed, Eurovision grew beyond anyone's expectations. By the 1960s, it had become a mirror of Europe's social evolution. When ABBA stormed the stage in 1974 with Waterloo, they didn't just win a contest, they launched a global phenomenon. When Celine Dion, a young Canadian singing for Switzerland, triumphed in 1988, she showed how music transcended geography entirely. In the 1990s, as new nations emerged from the fall of the Soviet Union and the Balkans burned with conflict, Eurovision became a symbol of rebirth. Countries newly freed from oppression stood proudly under their flags, singing not just to win, but to be seen, to be heard, to belong. Every note, every costume, every camera pan reflected something deeper: the ever-evolving identity of a continent trying to redefine itself through art. The politics of pop. Of course, Eurovision was never purely about music. Beneath its glittering surface, it became a subtle stage for politics, identity, and power. Votes sometimes reflected alliances more than artistry: neighbors rewarding neighbors, blocs supporting blocs. Yet, even in its biases, Eurovision revealed something raw and real about the European psyche. Unity and rivalry could coexist. When LGBTQ+ performers like Dana International, Israel 1998, and Conchita Wurst, Austria 2014 took the stage, Eurovision became more than entertainment, it became a cultural revolution. Millions watched as diversity found not just acceptance, but celebration on live television. Through sequins and spotlights, the show carried quiet defiance, a message that freedom of expression, in all its forms, was the true anthem of modern Europe. The global stage. What began as a European experiment evolved into a global event. By the 2000s, Eurovision broadcasts reached audiences across Australia, the Middle East, and even the Americas. Australia eventually joined the contest in 2015, a testament to the show's extraordinary reach. Today, more than 180 million people tune in every year. Cities transform into festival grounds, fans paint their faces with flags, and nations pause to watch, not as rivals, but as a global family gathered around a single broadcast. In an era of political divides and digital noise, Eurovision remains one of the few traditions where hope still trends. The contest endures as proof that music, at its best, is diplomacy in disguise. October's quiet legacy. And so, when we look back to that crisp October day in 1955, The boardroom meeting at the EBU might seem small, almost trivial. No fireworks, no fanfare, just quiet agreement among visionaries who believed that the airwaves could heal what wars had broken. Yet that moment reshaped the cultural DNA of an entire continent. What John Jay once did for law, what Frederick Douglass did for justice, the EBU did for art. They institutionalized peace through creation. From that day onward, October 19th marked not a political revolution, but a cultural one. One that continues to echo in every chorus sung on that stage, every flag waved in that crowd, and every tear shed when the lights dim after the final song. Because Eurovision is not merely a contest, it's a story of Europe choosing connection over conflict, laughter over loss, and melody over memory. A chorus of nations. The lights fade. A single stage glows in the dark, as voices from dozens of languages rise together. Some sing in pride, others in pain, but together, they sound like Europe. From its humble origins in a post-war meeting room to its colossal Technicolor modern spectacle, Eurovision stands as a testament to one idea, that music can outlast empires. So when we hear that familiar fanfare, when the stage lights ignite and the flags wave, we aren't just watching a show. We're witnessing the continuation of October 19, 1955, the day a continent decided to sing instead of fight. Let there be music, the EBU once said. And Europe, beautifully, defiantly, has never stopped singing since. Number 10. Fahrenheit 451, the fire that tried to burn thought itself. Sparks in a Cold War night, the year was 1953, and the world stood on the trembling edge of two extremes: scientific progress and intellectual paranoia. Nuclear weapons gleamed under the banners of power. McCarthyism was in full swing. Fear wasn't just political, it was cultural. Books were being challenged, writers blacklisted, and ideas buried under accusation. In that uneasy silence, a man sat in a small room in Los Angeles, surrounded by the rhythmic hum of typewriters. His name was Ray Bradbury, and he was about to ignite a literary fire that would burn across generations. "It was a pleasure to burn," he wrote. Those 6 words opened Fahrenheit 451, published on October 19, 1953. A story about a future where books are outlawed, firemen no longer save lives but burn ideas, and thinking freely becomes an act of rebellion. That single spark, the story of a man questioning the fire, became one of the most haunting reflections of human society ever written. A world afraid of words. To understand Fahrenheit 451, we must understand the world it was born into. The early 1950s in America were charged with paranoia. The Cold War divided the planet, and fear of communism seeped into every home, classroom, and cinema. The House Un-American Activities Committee hunted artists and intellectuals, accusing them of dangerous ideas. Books were quietly pulled from shelves, teachers self-censored, people whispered before speaking. Bradbury saw it all: the fear, the conformity, the blind consumption of entertainment over enlightenment. And he asked the most dangerous question of all: what happens when people stop reading, stop thinking, and stop caring? In Fahrenheit 451, firemen no longer extinguish fires, they create them, torching homes that hide books, reducing literature to ash, and with it, the memory of freedom. The society in the novel isn't governed by a dictator. It's shaped by its own laziness, by people choosing comfort over curiosity, pleasure over purpose. Bradbury wasn't warning us about government control. He was warning us about ourselves. The fireman who began to think at the heart of this dystopian nightmare stands Guy Montag, a loyal fireman who begins to question his role. One night, while watching a woman choose to burn with her books rather than live without them, something breaks inside him. That moment, quiet, tragic, and defiant, becomes the ignition point for his awakening. He begins to ask questions. Why do books make people dangerous? What do they contain that terrifies those in power? Through Montag's rebellion, Bradbury confronts readers with their own reflection. We too scroll, consume, obey, until we forget how to think for ourselves. You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture, Bradbury once said. Just get people to stop reading them. Each page of Fahrenheit 451 isn't just fiction, it's prophecy. A future imagined in the 1950s that feels eerily close to our own digital present. Writing in the shadows. Oh, few know that Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451 in a library basement, paying 10 cents per half hour to use a rented typewriter. Surrounded by thousands of books, he poured his fear and fury into the keys, finishing the manuscript in just 9 days. He didn't write it for fame. He wrote it as an act of preservation, a desperate attempt to protect the written word from the slow suffocation of apathy. When publishers first received the manuscript, they were hesitant. It was dark, defiant, unflinchingly critical of modern media. But Bradbury stood firm. He refused to tone down his message. When Fahrenheit 451 was finally released, it wasn't just another novel. It was a manifesto, a cry for awareness wrapped in the firelight of fiction. Critics called it alarming. Librarians called it prophetic. Readers called it unforgettable. Fire beyond the page. What made Fahrenheit 451 so powerful wasn't just its story, it was its timing. America was falling in love with television. Families gathered around glowing screens, trading conversation for convenience. Political speeches, commercials, and entertainment blended into one hypnotic stream of noise. Bradbury saw what others didn't: the slow death of thought. In the novel, people live in rooms surrounded by wall-sized televisions, where family refers to virtual personalities rather than real human beings. Sound familiar? It is not hard to see the parallels with today's world. Smartphones in every hand, algorithms curating what we read, echo chambers burning nuance like dry paper. Bradbury's dystopia isn't tomorrow, it's now. And that's what makes Fahrenheit 451 timeless. It's less a prediction and more a warning, one we keep ignoring. From page to screen and back again. The story of Fahrenheit 451 didn't stay on the page. In 1966, legendary filmmaker François Truffaut brought it to life in vivid color, the first English-language film he ever directed. The image of firemen in sleek uniforms, flamethrowers roaring against shelves of books, became an enduring symbol of resistance against censorship. In 2018, HBO reimagined the story for a digital generation, replacing books with data and book burning with data deletion. The adaptation wasn't perfect, but the message still hit home. What if knowledge itself could be rewritten, erased, or replaced by screens too bright to question? Even today, the book is banned or challenged in some schools, proving Bradbury's point in real time. Ironically, the very novel warning against censorship continues to be censored. The fire still burns. More than 70 years after its publication, Fahrenheit 451 remains a cornerstone of modern literature. It's studied in schools, referenced in politics, and quoted by activists who fight for freedom of expression. But beyond the classrooms and essays lies its true brilliance, its ability to haunt. Whenever a regime bans books, whenever an artist is silenced, whenever a society trades depth for distraction, Bradbury's fire rekindles. Even today, his words feel uncomfortably close. We need not to be let alone. We need to be really bothered once in a while. How long is it since you were really bothered? About something important? About something real? In a world overflowing with information but starving for meaning, Bradbury's question feels like a challenge. Will we read, think, and question, or simply scroll until we forget? October 19th, the day the fire began. On that autumn day in 1953, when Fahrenheit 451 first hit the shelves, it didn't just enter the world, it changed it. It dared to speak truth to comfort. It forced readers to confront what they were becoming. And it reminded humanity that fire doesn't only destroy, it reveals. As long as we continue to read, to question, and to guard our freedom to think, Fahrenheit 451 lives on, not as fiction, but as resistance. So perhaps October 19th isn't just the day a book was published. It's the day humanity was reminded of the most important truth of all. You can't burn an idea. Number 11, Santos-Dumont flies. Around the Eiffel Tower, 1901, Paris, October 19th, 1901. A crisp morning sky stretched over the French capital, painted in soft gold by the rising sun. Below, an anxious crowd gathered in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, their eyes fixed on a slender figure preparing for what many called an impossible feat. The man was Alberto Santos-Dumont, a Brazilian-born inventor whose obsession with conquering the skies had captured Europe's imagination. His mission that day? To fly his airship, Dirigible No. 6, around the Eiffel Tower and return to the starting point within 30 minutes. If successful, he would claim the prestigious Deutsche de la Meurthe Prize and forever etch his name in aviation history. The spirit of a dreamer. Alberto Santos-Dumont wasn't just an inventor. He was a showman, a visionary, and above all, a dreamer. Living in Paris at the dawn of the 20th century, he became fascinated by flight long before powered airplanes existed. Unlike many who relied on large institutions or state funding, Santos-Dumont worked almost entirely on his own, designing, building, and piloting his own aircraft. In his workshop, nestled within the Parisian boulevards, Santos-Dumont crafted balloons and small airships with meticulous precision. His dream wasn't merely to float, it was to control movement through the air, to steer and navigate like a bird choosing its course. The challenge was monumental. Balloons could drift, but they couldn't return. Airships promised direction, but only if the engine and structure could balance perfectly against wind, lift, and gravity. A city. Waiting to believe. By 1901, Paris was the beating heart of innovation. The Eiffel Tower, built just a decade earlier, stood as a symbol of engineering triumph. Yet even amid that technological optimism, many doubted that controlled flight could ever become practical. So when Santos-Dumont announced his intention to circle the tower and return to his hangar at Parc Saint-Cloud, the news electrified the city. Newspapers called it a dare to the gods of the wind. Onlookers gathered along the Seine. Artists and aristocrats mingled with mechanics and schoolchildren, all waiting to witness something extraordinary. The air was thick with both excitement and skepticism. The flight begins. At precisely 2:42 p.m., Santos-Dumont's Dirigible No. 6, a long cigar-shaped balloon powered by a tiny internal combustion engine, began to rise. The crowd gasped as the golden envelope shimmered against the autumn sky. Beneath it hung a small gondola, open to the elements, with Santos-Dumont standing proudly, goggles in place, hand gripping the controls. The dirigible moved forward gracefully, humming with mechanical rhythm as it ascended toward the iron silhouette of the Eiffel Tower. Every turn of the propeller was a triumph of both courage and engineering. The moment of truth. As he reached the tower, the challenge became clear. Gusts swirled unpredictably around the massive iron structure, threatening to toss the airship off course. For a heart-stopping moment, the dirigible wobbled, tilting dangerously toward one of the tower's girders. The crowd gasped, but Santos-Dumont, calm and precise, adjusted his rudder, the airship steadying as it swung in a smooth arc around the tower's tip. He had done it, or so it seemed. The real test was yet to come, returning to the start before 30 minutes elapsed. The crowd checked their watches, racing the clock. On his way back to St. Cloud, the wind turned against him. The small engine strained and the dirigible slowed to a crawl. Every minute felt eternal. At one point, the motor sputtered, threatening to stall completely, but Santos-Dumont's steady hand coaxed it back to life. Paris held its breath as the airship crept across the horizon. Finally, with just seconds to spare, 29 minutes and 30 seconds after takeoff, Santos-Dumont landed. A roar erupted from the crowd. He had succeeded. Triumph in the air. The victory was more than just mechanical. It was philosophical. Proof that human ingenuity could master the skies. The feat made headlines around the world. The New York Times called him the man who tamed the wind. The Paris Herald declared the moment a turning point in human progress. When the officials confirmed his time, the crowd surged forward, cheering and lifting Santos-Dumont onto their shoulders. True to his generous spirit, he immediately shared the 125,000 franc prize, donating a portion to his mechanics and the poor of Paris. The birth of modern aviation. While the Wright brothers would later achieve powered airplane flight in 1903, Santos-Dumont's success marked a pivotal moment in aviation. His achievement proved that controlled, navigable air travel was not a fantasy, but a feasible pursuit. His work inspired a generation of engineers, from Europe to America, to dream bigger, to build faster, lighter, more agile flying machines. Santos-Dumont continued to experiment, creating new airships and even the compact Demoiselle, one of the first ultralight aircraft. He became a celebrity of the Belle Époque, often flying over Paris cafes in his small craft, tipping his hat to astonished patrons below. A legacy beyond the clouds. But beyond the applause and fame, Santos-Dumont's accomplishment carried a deeper significance. He represented the human desire to defy limits, the need to rise, literally and figuratively, above the boundaries of Earth. His victory wasn't just about a machine circling a tower, it was about imagination circling possibility. The Eiffel Tower itself, once a symbol of engineering might, became forever linked with the dream of flight. To this day, photographs of that delicate airship drifting past its iron arches evoke a sense of wonder. A reminder that progress often begins with a single act of courage. The man who made the sky accessible. In later years, Santos-Dumont grew disillusioned as aviation was increasingly used for war. The same skies he once conquered with peace and pride became filled with machines built for destruction. Yet history remembers him not for conflict, but for curiosity, for believing that flight could unite humanity rather than divide it. When he died in 1932, nations mourned him as the father of aviation in Brazil and a pioneer for the world. His spirit, however, lives on in every aircraft that takes off, in every dreamer who looks up and imagines what's possible. That October day in 1901 was more than a race against time. It was a moment when humanity's ancient wish to soar touched reality. Alberto Santos-Dumont didn't just fly around the Eiffel Tower, he circled history itself. He proved that dreams, when lifted by courage and guided by precision, could truly take flight. Number 12. The birth of Georg Knorr, the man who tamed momentum, 1859. Engineering the brakes that changed the world. On October 19, 1859, in the quiet town of Braunschweig, Germany, a boy was born who would one day revolutionize how the world stopped moving. His name was Georg Knorr, and though few outside the world of engineering might know him by name today, his innovations in railway braking systems would become one of the unsung cornerstones of modern transportation safety. This is the story of how one man's ingenuity transformed the unstoppable power of steel and steam into something controllable, reliable, and profoundly human. The story of the man who made momentum safe. A world racing ahead. By the mid-19th century, the world was moving faster than ever. Steam locomotives thundered across Europe and America, carrying coal, cargo, and crowds. Nations were stitching themselves together with iron rails, symbols of progress and power. But amid the triumph of speed lurked a deadly flaw. There was no reliable way to stop. Early trains depended on hand-operated brakes. Brakemen, standing perilously on each car, would manually tighten brake wheels as the engineer whistled commands. Communication was imperfect, coordination dangerous, and results inconsistent. Trains often overran stations or collided on the tracks. Every crash told the same tragic story. Great machines that could go faster than human reflexes could control. The young engineer's vision. Into this world of industrial wonder and peril was born Georg Knorr, a boy fascinated by machinery. His early years were filled with curiosity. He would spend hours studying the rhythm of moving parts, the way pressure and motion interacted. Germany at the time was a hub of mechanical innovation, and Knorr's education would blend precision engineering with practical vision. He moved to Berlin, the epicenter of Europe's rail revolution, where workshops hummed with invention. There, Knorr found his calling not in building faster trains, but in making them safer. A new kind of safety. In 1870s Germany, engineers were already experimenting with air brake systems, inspired by the work of George Westinghouse in America. Westinghouse had pioneered the use of compressed air to control train brakes, a concept that dramatically improved safety. But the technology was still rough, expensive, and often unreliable under European rail conditions. Georg Knorr saw both the genius and the gaps. He believed that compressed air braking systems could be refined, simplified, and adapted for the complex rail networks of Europe. His approach was not to copy, but to innovate, to make braking smarter, faster, and more efficient. The founding of Knorr-Bremse. In 1883, Knorr founded his company, the Knorr-Bremse AG, in Berlin. What began as a small mechanical workshop would evolve into one of the most important industrial safety enterprises in history. Knorr's early breakthroughs involved improving the valve systems that controlled the distribution of air pressure across multiple train cars. His modifications allowed for smoother, synchronized braking, reducing the violent jerks that once sent passengers flying from their seats. Soon, his name became synonymous with precision and reliability. The Knorr air brake system spread rapidly across German and European railways. It wasn't long before it was adopted internationally, a quiet revolution in motion. Engineering meets humanity. Knorr's work wasn't glamorous, but it was deeply human. Every bolt, every valve, every carefully calculated pressure ratio was driven by one principle: to prevent loss of life. Railway travel, once thrilling but perilous, became safer, more predictable, and therefore more widely trusted. Cities connected more confidently. Commerce grew. Families could travel without fear. Knorr's invention, though mechanical in nature, helped engineer trust into a world obsessed with progress. It is no exaggeration to say that the modern concept of public transport safety began with Knorr's insistence that technology should protect people, not just impress them. The quiet innovator. Unlike flamboyant inventors of his era, Knorr shunned fame. He preferred workshops to salons, gears to glory. His colleagues described him as meticulous to the last detail, a man who would test a new valve design for weeks before approving its production. His office was often filled with the hiss of compressed air, the smell of oil, and the click of drafting tools. To Knorr, beauty wasn't in appearance, it was in function. And through function came salvation. As his company grew, he established rigorous testing protocols, a revolutionary concept at the time. Every component was tested for durability and precision before installation. This culture of engineering integrity would become a lasting legacy, one that still defines Knorr-Bremse today, now a global leader in braking and safety systems. A turning point for modern travel. By the dawn of the 20th century, trains had evolved from clattering beasts of steam to smooth, sleek symbols of civilization. Yet their transformation into a safe public utility rested on one simple truth: they could stop when they needed to. Knorr's systems became integral to passenger and freight networks alike. They worked not just in ideal conditions, but in freezing winters, high altitudes, and war-torn front lines. The technology saved countless lives, not through drama, but through dependability. During World War I, rail transport became the logistical backbone of Europe. Without reliable braking, supply lines would have collapsed. Knorr's legacy ensured they didn't. Beyond the rails. After Georg Knorr's death in 1911, his company continued to innovate, extending air brake technology beyond trains to trams, trucks, and later automobiles. His original vision, control through air and precision, became the foundation for modern braking systems used in nearly every heavy vehicle on Earth. Today, when a high-speed train glides to a smooth stop at a station, or when a freight locomotive halts safely under tons of load, it carries within it a spark of Knorr's 19th century genius. Legacy in motion. Knorr's contribution to history is often overshadowed by flashier tales of invention: airplanes, cars, electricity. Yet without him, industrial progress would have remained a perilous ride. His genius lay in addressing a question most ignored: not how to move, but how to stop safely. The company he built continues to thrive as Knorr-Bremse AG, a global powerhouse headquartered in Munich, supplying advanced braking and safety systems for rail and commercial vehicles in over 30 countries. Its guiding principle remains unchanged: safety through precision, a reflection of progress. If the 19th century taught humanity how to move faster, Georg Knorr taught it how to move wisely. His air brake systems weren't just mechanical innovations, they were moral ones. They symbolized the maturity of human progress. That speed must always be balanced with responsibility. He didn't just engineer brakes, he engineered trust in motion. So when we stand today at a railway platform watching a massive train slow from thunder to silence, we are witnessing the echo of a man born on an autumn day in 1859. A man whose quiet mind and steady hands gave humanity the power not just to advance, but to pause, protect, and endure. And there you have it, 12 moments in history, each echoing across time, each reminding us that October 19th has never been just another day on the calendar. From the thunder of cannons at Yorktown that shaped a nation's freedom, to the quiet hum of Georg Knorr's workshop, where precision engineering redefined how humanity moves safely, from Santos-Dumont's daring flight circling the Eiffel Tower against Parisian skies, to Ray Bradbury's pen igniting the world's imagination with Fahrenheit 451, every story whispers the same truth. Progress is written by those who dare to do something different. These aren't just events, they're turning points, each born from courage, curiosity, or sheer human will. The stock markets may have crashed, the wars may have burned, and science may have shattered its own understanding of reality. But through it all, one thread connects every moment: the endless pursuit of what's next. And speaking of what's next, if today's journey through time left you inspired, intrigued, or simply curious about how yesterday shaped tomorrow, then don't stop here. Before we turn the page to October 20th, let's rewind just a bit. Go watch our previous episode, Top Historical Events of October 18th. You will uncover stories just as fascinating, from the inventions that changed the rhythm of daily life to the battles that redrew maps and hearts alike. It's not just history, it's humanity, told one date at a time. Then, stay tuned, because tomorrow, on October 20th, history takes another leap. New ideas are born, nations shift, art evolves, and human destiny continues to unfold in unexpected ways. You won't want to miss it. Our journey through time doesn't end with dates, it begins with you. When you share these stories, when you talk about them, when you teach your kids or friends or followers, you keep history alive. You keep curiosity alive. So, if this documentary stirred something in you, if it made you think, feel, or see our world in a slightly different light, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your community and circles. Because knowledge multiplies when it's shared. And every click, every comment, every conversation keeps the timeline of history growing stronger. Tomorrow is another day, another chapter. But before we go, remember this. The world you live in today is built upon the triumphs, failures, dreams, and discoveries of countless yesterdays. From the roar of revolutions to the whisper of an engineer fine-tuning a valve, each moment matters. So join us again, same time, same channel, as we uncover what happened on October 20th and continue our quest to rediscover the past that shaped our present. Because history isn't just about what was, it's about what still is, living in every choice, every invention, and every one of us.